Welcome to My Art Broker Talks. I'm your host, Charlotte Stewart, and today is the next in a series of episodes where we are talking about key players in the art and technology space. Our guest today is Hephaestus, and we're very honoured to be joined by their CEO, Denis. Denis, thank you so much for being here. So Denis, what is Hephaestus and who is it for? Let's start there.
Hephaestus is an authentication company, and we're actually the only company in the world that can provide a third-party authenticity guarantee. And that authenticity guarantee is backed by an insurance product that's been in the works for 3 years. We were founded 5 years ago, and we actually realized that authentication in the secondary market was, for want of a better word, broken. Sometimes it just didn't work. So, for example, in 2011, we saw Sotheby's sell a purported Franz Hals for 8 million that was consigned by a major dealer. It was recognized by the Louvre, tested it and said it was original. It was proclaimed a national treasure. And yet in 2016, we found out that actually it was a forgery and that there are about 20 of these old master forgeries floating around in the market. So ultimately, authentication was inconclusive. And the other problem was that other times it was just very expensive and time consuming and highly fragmented. So if you wanted to prove that a painting was authentic, you would have to find a dealer or find a connoisseur, then you'd have to speak to a scientific department, then you'd have to speak to a provenance researcher. And we wanted to solve all of these sort of problems. And most of all, we felt that authenticity shouldn't live in this gray area. A painting is either by an artist or not. And we wanted to find a way of being the first company in the world to be able to guarantee the authenticity of an object. So that's what we did. We set out with that mission of eliminating forgery and creating a protocol. And we built a protocol by developing new technologies and bringing in all of these aspects of authenticity in-house. So we do our own provenance research, we do our own scientific analysis, we have our own connoisseurs that we work with very, very closely. And now, more recently, we've also adopted and started using our own machine learning algorithms that we call pictology. And all of these aspects together in a very sort of carefully sequenced protocol has allowed us to be incredibly certain when it comes to authenticity, which is why we're now able to offer authenticity guarantees backed by insurance.
What an extraordinary mission, by the way, to eliminate forgery in the art market. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest problems. And I know there's a lot of companies where their mission is to do it with the primary market by starting from scratch, right? So that they are ensuring that new emerging artists have a dossier, whether digital or not. But in many cases now, they're trying to secure that even on the blockchain to try and harness that. And my question has always been, but what about the secondary market? You can't do that. You can't. First of all, and we understand about expertise. And I think, I want to get to that a little bit later and what we really see as expertise in this space, because it's a very grey area. But tell me about the technology. How are you using machine learning in order to accredit authenticity to something?
So perhaps we start with scientific analysis. The reason why we sort of wanted to really dive into scientific analysis was because it provided an objective way of seeing if a painting was right or wrong. The problem with science is that although it can get you to the right date range of when a painting may have been produced by dating the materials, you can never attribute the hand of an artist to a painting using scientific chemical analysis alone. So what we did with the machine learning aspect is that we sort of borrowed the same aspect of objectivity and a data-driven approach, but in a way that allows us to actually identify the artists themselves. And what we're able to do with machine learning is feed our algorithms a set of training data, typically between 20 to 30 high-resolution images of an artist's work, and basically say, look, can you look at the oeuvre of paintings produced by this artist and identify the unique characteristics and the features that are present in all of them? And can those features then be differentiated from other artists? In what way are those characteristics unique. And what we found was that machine learning was actually incredibly capable in doing that. It was very, very, very good at identifying the differences between even closely related artists. So we started, our very first test of the technology was on Canaletto and Bellotto. So two Venetian artists working in the 18th century, Canaletto being the master and Bellotto being his nephew, who also happened to work in his studio. And this has been a really sort of long-term art historical problem. It's how can you actually tell the difference between these two? And after teaching and training our machine and algorithms on the two artists, it was able to identify the differences between them. I think it was 98.4% accuracy. So what we found at that point was, wow, okay, AI and machine learning can actually solve a really difficult problem. And how can we actually use this tool to then identify forgeries and identify attribution? And that's why we brought it into our protocol, is that it allows things to be done very quickly, very inexpensively, and also adds that extra layer of certainty that allows us to go all the way to actually authenticating, providing guarantees. The other way that we use technology, you've alluded to it, is blockchain. So we're sort of trying to use all the buzzwords there at Hephaestus, but we're actually using all of these technologies for really, really good reasons. So for example, with blockchain, it allows us to decentralize our protocol somewhat, because we're allowing our service providers to enter results or data into the blockchain so that unilaterally. So we can't then edit those results and change things, which means that we are less susceptible to some sort of bad actor. The other way that we use blockchain is actually to secure our results. So we've actually found that our certificates of authenticity have started being forged or doctored or edited, and are being used in the market to prove the authenticity of objects that we have identified as forgeries. And this is why where the blockchain comes in, is rather than focus on paper certificates that can be forged, we're now using digital certificates that can't, and that are connected to a physical object, which means that even if a painting is copied, the provenance is copied, our certificates are copied, we can still establish that the painting is a duplicate, and that we can establish that actually something has gone on, and that our authentications do not support the authenticity of that copy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely extraordinary and fascinating product. Just because I must play the role of a naysayer, may I ask some difficult questions? With many of the pieces of technology coming into the landscape at the moment, we're looking at trying to automate expertise and create more efficiencies. Old masters aside, how does this work for something like prints and editions? Something where in its very essence, the work has been created by a machine, in many cases itself. And obviously forgeries in our space are a huge problem, because everything from Banksy, Warhol, the market's been flooded with fakes. Banksy has its own way of dealing with that, which is music to dealers' ears and private collectors' ears, as long as you're on the right side of it. But how well would the product work on a Warhol Marilyn?
It's a good question. In fact, this is probably why we started with paintings, is that they are unique objects. So when it comes to our authenticity guarantees and our insurance product, we're currently only able to offer that on paintings. Now, where we see the technology going is that we will be able to work on multiple prints and multiples. But our first step is going to be drawings or works on paper in that regard, where it's not a mechanical means of reproduction. It's still a unique hand at play. So machine learning will be helpful there, but perhaps less so when it comes to actually prints and multiples. The scientific component probably plays a larger role in that, as well as provenance and connoisseurship. But more so provenance and scientific analysis to date the materials to the right period, and provenance to ensure that the object has actually been around for a select period of time.
Mm. So talk us through the process of working with you. If I'm a private collector and I'm looking to acquire something, and perhaps I've seen something out there that I want to acquire, can I bring you on board from before I've bought it to check the work?
We'd love that to happen more. I think what we've seen is that sellers are quite reticent to actually allow analysis and authenticity to take place before the sale. Most of our work happens post-sale, which is quite a tricky place to be. So we would love more sellers, more platforms, more dealers to open the doors to us. And they shouldn't fear us either, because I think once we authenticate something, it actually adds a lot of credibility to the sale process. But it really is up to the seller to decide if they're willing to allow us to access the picture beforehand. In the case of, once someone's acquired something, yes, we're very, very happy to work on it. The painting can either travel to our labs. We have offices in Battersea Power Station or in Cambridge, or we can go to the private collector and do our analysis there in situ. So we would have to take a couple of samples from the picture, and that would be it, really. We would take those samples away, we'd send them to our labs, and within 4 to 6 weeks, you would have a full authentication.
It's interesting, isn't it? The sort of people are a little wary of, particularly if they own something, putting it under scrutiny. It's obviously the very high-profile Joe Simons case, which closed down the Warhol Authentication Board, having been stamped as fake and then proven to be real. How many works do you see which have gone through sale or have been rejected in some way by a respected reputation? How many minds do you change using technology versus expertise?
It happens more often than the art market would like to admit. I think it's forgery and authenticity issues remain, I suppose, an open secret, but the art market, especially the higher level, seem to refuse to want to talk about it at all. Forgery is sort of this word that everyone avoids, even though everyone knows that it's around. In fact, I think we were the first company to really start using the word and saying, look, we need to start speaking about it. It's an uncomfortable truth. So I guess the art market says that there really isn't much of a problem. And then the media or sort of journalists jump on these sort of big figures of 50% of the market is a forgery or inauthentic. And I think we probably think that it's somewhere in between there. The truth lies somewhere in between. As an authenticator that primarily currently works post-sale, I will say that most of the works that come to us are in fact forgeries. And because there's a problem, things are only tested at the moment once a problem has been identified, or that the market suddenly isn't sure about a work, and therefore it has to go through the scrutiny. Market accepted works as such don't ever get tested, even if they are problematic. Once, say a forgery was circulating in the 70s, suddenly it's got 50 years of great documentation, provenance. So who are you to say that for the last 50 years everyone was wrong? And that's what we're trying to sort of build upon, that actually we think that you should be authenticating pictures that even the market thinks are right. And unfortunately, we see a lot of cases where even the biggest auction houses, the biggest dealers do sometimes get it wrong. And it's our job now to not just be very good at authenticating, but actually incentivizing authenticity. And I think that's where we're sort of heading, is how do we get people to authenticate works that are market accepted? And what we're finding is that actually the participants that are most concerned about forgery are actually, for example, wealth managers or legacy banks. And they don't actually participate in the market at all. They're sort of interested, but they don't actually participate in terms of non-recourse lending, for example. And what we're doing now is speaking to a number of financial institutions to see if we can create a lending facility that basically says, because we're able to remove the risk of forgery and inauthenticity, would you be willing to offer a non-recourse loan on this asset at far preferential rates to what the market currently allows? And the answer is yes. So, for example, right now, the biggest companies offering non-recourse loans offer rates probably around 12 to 13% for terms of 2 to 3 years. We're currently in discussions with banks saying, well, if the object is insured, the non-recourse loan is actually at 8% with terms up to 5, maybe even 10 years. And I think that's a seismic shift in what is possible through authenticity. And that's what we're really driving at, and what we're really hoping for is that authenticity catalyzes a completely different market with far more liquidity, far more certainty, and allows for more transactions to take place because the risk is effectively gone.
Fascinating. I mean, I suppose, the key here is, what is the added value of having you on board, right? Like having your approval. And I think we've seen the ramifications of certain people, certain institutions adding value to something. And we've also quite often in the prints market, because they are so heavily faked, we see works which have gone through several institutions, but a story might come out in the press about one of those institutions, and it almost tarnishes its entire lifetime which is incredibly painful for the owner and the seller, because one gallery's misdemeanor, or more than misdemeanor, I should say, they may have sold thousands of artworks. How do you deal with it when computer says yes, but expert or provenance says no? What do you put above the other? And let's talk a little bit about what you look at. So obviously we look at, the machine learning looks at certain brushstrokes and colors and intricacies that an expert with 40 years of experience with that artist would see in a blink of an eye, because they know what they're looking for. It's ingrained in them. Signatures, paper stock. What are the things that the machine looks at, and how do you marry those two parts of expertise, machine expertise and human expertise in provenance?
I think a lot of people are worried about this AI versus connoisseur argument. Is AI and machine learning actually working in exactly the same way as a connoisseur? And the answer is yes and no. They are actually looking at very, very different things. We call them brushstrokes, but a machine only really interprets numbers. So it's our way of trying to understand and interpret what the machine is actually looking at. But an algorithm is looking at far more granular things that a connoisseur simply would not be able to do. It's looking at vast amounts of data and statistics across a large body of work instantaneously at any given time. And connoisseurs look at different things. They may look at composition or the feeling of a painting, or how an artist painted the ear lobe of their sitter. But none are looking at things in the granularity that machine learning is looking at. Now, where the similarities actually lie is that the process of learning is quite similar. A connoisseur, there are also levels to being a connoisseur. If you're a student who has never seen the artist's work before, but happens to have the catalogue raisonné in front of them for a couple of hours, sure, you might know better than the layperson, but you're not ever going to be as good as the expert that spent 40 years looking at these pictures. And connoisseurs also effectively work with a data set that they get over their entire lifetimes by looking at authentic works, but also by seeing forgeries and trying to understand the difference between them. So in those respects, AI is working quite similar to connoisseurs. But when it comes to what they're actually looking at, it's really not the same thing. So we find that the two tools are complementary, And the AI really is a tool in the overall protocol. When it comes to who should we trust more, I think we find that right now there really has to be consensus when it comes to everything aligning. And there's a lot of power in saying to a connoisseur that the science is perfectly consistent. It dates the picture to this period. The provenance is right. The machine learning algorithms are suggesting that the brushstrokes are exactly consistent. At that point, it's really for the connoisseur to start answering questions of why is it not authentic? Why are their feelings different? And I think that's where we have to have those conversations with connoisseurs. And very often we found that we're able to convince connoisseurs in the market of the authenticity of an object. And likewise, we're able to provide insights and data to prove that something isn't real. But it really, I think we need to accept in the market that neither method is better than the other. We tried. As a tech company, we wanted to find a silver bullet in science or machine learning. The reality is that there isn't one. You still have to work together and bring all of these aspects together in order to reach certainty. So that's the way that we view it, is that we need to collaborate rather than sort of compete.
Yeah, there's quite a famous Jeff Bezos quote going around Instagram at the moment about believe the anecdote, and if the data conflicts, go back to the data. And I suppose, and we often do that. So we have, our valuation product does a similar thing. It essentially automate the expertise of somebody in the Hockney market for X amount of years to come up with a valuation, which is not just built on 30% of the market, which is what most people look at when they look at public auction data. But with all these things, you're having to feed it almost every day with the edge cases, the day-to-day moving of that market, those outliers, those little things that if you haven't taught it, it can't learn and learn and learn. How far through that journey of teaching the algo do you feel you are at the moment?
It'll never stop. I think the great thing about AI and machine learning is that as long as you make sure that the data is good, as long as you curate it and make sure that you're not suddenly feeding it with forgeries or misattributed works, or works that are heavily restored, for example, without delineating and designating where those restorations are. We're very fortunate in that being a scientific company that not only focuses on attributing works and authenticating works, but also identifying forgeries, we have a very, very good source of forgery data. And I think that's a real benefit to us, because not only are we able to just teach the machine what an authentic work looks like and maybe compare it to contemporary painters that painted in a similar style, we're actually able to feed it and teach it against data where there are sophisticated individuals looking at all the scientific reporting, all the materials, looking incredibly carefully at the works that they're forging and trying to mimic those styles. And that's where I think we're really quite excited to be building this, is that we're able to source these data points from all sorts of things, not only from our museum partnerships or from what's available in the public domain, but also from the forgeries that we've been seeing for the last 5 years.
So where do you get that great? First of all, I feel like what you need, and maybe you've got one, is how the police bring in ex criminals. Where do you get this brilliant forgery data from? Because there's nothing better than an expert in forgery than a forger themselves.
We do. We do work with forgers or artists or conservators to try and mimic those things. We've also been involved with law enforcement as well. So we have helped in cases where forgery has come up. My background, my master's was on the possibility of creating a perfect forgery. So my background was to try and see if the science could identify forgeries. And unfortunately, sophisticated forgery that looks at scientific reporting can reverse engineer those tests, which is where we started the company. Is can we actually create a protocol that can't be reverse engineered? So our job is to keep testing it, to keep probing it, to keep trying to beat it. And I think we can comfortably say that we're in a position where it can't be reverse engineered. Does that mean that we stop developing? Does that mean that we stop trying to beat it? No. Our job is to continue to try and find any weaknesses, any attack vectors. And that's, again, why the strength of a multimodal approach is that there isn't a single thing for a forger to focus on. It's not just the science they need to trick. It's not just the AI they need to trick. It's not the provenance. It's everything collectively, which makes it so difficult, and why we're allowed to and able to offer the guarantees that we are.
Wow. In the world of advanced AI, how is this challenge, so this has been going for 5 years, how is this challenge going to change in the next 5 years? Because effectively you'll have the ability to do things that forgers haven't been able to do in the past as a quick leg up, maybe not the whole thing, but a quick leg up, particularly in the print space, I would imagine, where, perhaps it's easier. How are you going to combat the monster you're using for the monster you're against in the AI world that we're moving into?
Yeah, I think there's been a huge interest in generative AI recently. And a lot of that has been sort of grounded on, will generative AI replace artists? But what hasn't perhaps really been looked at is, can generative AI at some point be used to create incredibly realistic compositions by artists? And the answer to that is that yes. Soon, we don't think that composition is going to be a usable trait or characteristic in the identification of forgery and attribution. Yet it's something that connoisseurs rely upon a lot. Is this shape isn't quite right, or this doesn't feel right. Well, those feelings and shapes and compositions are going to be fixed very, very quickly, because that's how AI learns, right? It's going to be able to be fed all the information of bona fide paintings and say, please spit out a composition. So those aspects are very soon, I think, going to become a bit of a minefield. Now, will that trip us up? No, because the AI-generated digital version of a painting still has to be painted and produced and brought onto canvas or panel or whatever the support might be, which means that our machine learning algorithms, what they're focusing on, brushstrokes and the data within them, they're still going to be identifying the unique characteristics of the artist at play. Now, the next question might be, will there be a day where things can be printed and look exactly the same? Perhaps, but then we look at the science as well. So the chemical composition of the pigments won't be right. So as you might see, it is sort of an arms race, but given where we are right now, we are very, very far ahead of where forgers might be. But we're going to continue to be, keep our fingers on the pulse of any technical innovations and make sure that we're ahead of the curve there.
Mm-hmm. How long does a guarantee stick for? If I get a certificate from you, how long does it stick for?
So the insurance product can be purchased for 0.5% of the value of the painting, right. And that's on an annual basis. So we see the real use of the insurance product being in transactions. So, for example, we can imagine a platform that can offer a guarantee, and that insurance product just becomes part of the transaction. And then the owner can continue paying the premium and having the policy if they like. So the insurance product is transferable, which is really exciting. And it's also going to be useful for lenders. So if a lender is offering a non-recourse loan for 3 years or even 5 years, they're able to insure their risk for the duration of that loan. So that's where we find the insurance product to be particularly useful, is the point of sale, for any added assurances moving forward for the collector if they have any doubts or want to ensure that the risk is insured, and for lenders.
I mean, I can see this sort of product, when you bear in mind that of the 4 big auction houses, they only guarantee authenticity for, I think, is it 5 years? So sort of 3 or 5 years, which is a real downside, for if a company or a gallery can offer lifetime guarantee, or, personal guarantee against it. That can be incredibly useful. What's the plan? Would you look at white labeling a product like this into a major auction house and deal with that trust element within the secondary market?
I think the first thing to perhaps speak about is the authenticity guarantees offered by the big auction houses. When you really look at the terms and conditions, it's very, very, very difficult for you to get your money back if the work that you bought is a forgery. If you look at the sort of scientific component of what needs to be done, it says that it has to be a test that is generally used and accepted by the art market. Well, what does that mean? It can't damage the painting in any way. Well, how about a micro sample of paint? Is that damage? Is that not? It can't be too time consuming. Well, again, that's quite a sort of vague thing, and it can't be too expensive. So all of these aspects are, okay, well, first you have to get through that, but in order to actually get your money, you have to litigate. So you're either relying on the goodwill of the auction house, or you have to take them to court. And I think that's where our authenticity guarantees really are quite different, is that you don't have to go through that process. If you are able to prove that the picture is a forgery after we've tested it, we ask a mutual intermediary party to verify the result. And if so, you don't have to litigate. There's no courts. So I think the difference between what an authenticity guarantee means to us as a company is very different to what authenticity guarantees are in the art market more generally. So that's going to be our first difficulty in terms of educating and using the vocabulary and explaining how we're different to the auction houses guarantees. And of course, as you say, it's the first opportunity for dealers, for galleries to be able to offer these authenticity guarantees without them being personally liable. And what is the use of a guarantee if you're selling a picture for 10 million, but you don't have 10 million in your bank account? That guarantee isn't particularly useful. Whereas our authenticity guarantees, backed by an insurance product, will allow you to pay in the case of a claim. And yes, our mission ultimately, again, is to eliminate forgery from the market. That's how we make decisions in the company. So if an auction house were to turn to us and say, could we white label your services? The answer is yes. It's fulfilling our mission. It's helping reduce the risk in the system. It removes forgery from circulation. So yes, we'd be very happy to white label our services.
It would destroy their consignments though, wouldn't it?
And I think that's the problem, is that actually we spoke to a couple of, this was years ago, mind you, to a couple of participants in the markets, and they called this a first mover disadvantage. And I found that really quite interesting, is that in order to test things, you have to add friction to the system. And that friction means that consignments are less likely to come your way. And I think that's probably quite emblematic of the problem that we're facing, is that we all know that there's a problem. Otherwise, authenticity guarantees would exist everywhere. And yet, to fix the problem, we need to really change the way that transactions take place. So that's where we currently are in terms of how do we incentivize these structures? How do we incentivize this change? How do we disrupt the way that the art market currently works in order to allow for buyers to have the certainty that, frankly, they deserve, I think we're finding more and more that the art market is a seller's market. And we want to help the buyers remove the risks to allow them to participate more and more. And that's why we're seeing liquidity on the sidelines, because ultimately they need to make sure that what they're buying into is real. And we're able to offer those guarantees.
I think you've got an enormous juggernaut to turn. One that's been, going for well over 250 years in terms of the art market and the way things are traded, and the fact that everything is very elitist and opaque, and it's one expert's word against another. And something that we do in the print market is, and we do it purposefully, is to have a third-party authenticator look at every single American pop work, because there are so many fakes out there, because we do have a personal guarantee and it's our liability. And having that third party who is not paid per authentic work they look at, quite specifically is paid differently. I think, this is really all we've got to go on at the moment. We've got, because it is a world of expertise. Dennis, what's next this year?
Good question. I mean, it's funny because we've existed for 5 years. We've been working on the insurance product for free, and no one knows about us because we've been sort of quietly sort of working away and trying to make it happen. So this is the year that we launched the product, and we see how the market reacts. Because until now, there has been no solution to forgery. There has been no option. And finally, there is a solution to the authentication problem. And we're going to have to see how the market reacts to that. As I sort of spoke about earlier, we're now also building our loan facility with financial institutions. So we're hoping that is going to be live probably by mid this year, which will enable collectors to leverage their assets and monetize them at preferential rates and at very, very competitive rates compared to what else is out there in the market. We have a lot of partnerships with museums that are being announced this year. We have been part of a documentary with the BBC that I think is coming out in May, where we use our machine learning algorithms to identify forgery in the Russian avant-garde market. So a lot of exciting things happening, and
lots of seeing the brand name a bit more, which will be exciting.
Exactly.
Where does the brand name come from?
So Hephaestus was the god of the forge, and I think everyone mistakenly thinks, oh, forgery, there we go. Actually, where the link comes in is that he produced the armor and the arms for the gods of Olympus. And what we're hoping to do is provide the art market with the arms and armor it needs to grow, become more liquid and more certain.
Love it. Thank you so much, Dennis. It's been brilliant.
Amazing. Thank you, Charlotte.